The presentation I gave in February at the Institute, and then an update that explores what happened since then. To paraphrase Leo Tolstoy, happy families are all alike. Every family in which a loved one suffers from dementia is unhappy in its own way. My beloved wife Nilda died of Alzheimer's at the end of May last year, after a gradual but relentless decline of more than 10 years. Like almost every case of Alzheimer's, her decline began gradually, almost imperceptibly, easily ignored or taken for what might be the normal decline of memory as one grows old. Perhaps we might liken the beginning of Alzheimer's to a small rivulet that is simply part of the scenery of one's life. But the rivulet grows into a stream, the stream broadens and gathers strength until it flows into a mighty river that is carrying the patient along on a turbulent current. The river grows wider and deeper, the patient drifting farther and farther from the shore until the river empties into the mighty sea of death. And I, the lover, the caregiver, run along the bank, calling out to my beloved to return, unable to save her, unable even to enter that river so that I could better understand her journey as she drifts in a world of her own until she disappears from sight. But this is not a talk about the scourge of Alzheimer's or Nilda's journey or about my journey. Nor is it a talk about all I had to do to care for her when she was unable to care for herself. It is not about what I did for Nilda, but what about what God did for me. Life is a school to learn how to love. When we take a spouse, we think we are doing so because we love that person. In the marriage ceremony, we pledge to love and support our spouse in good times and bad, in sickness and in health. But it is not when we are married that we learn to love, but during the course of the marriage. And if we do not learn how to love our spouse as the years roll on, the marriage will die, even if there is no divorce. It is in dealing with a spouse with dementia that love is tested to its limits and the meaning of love becomes engraved on the soul. When Nilda first realized that she was entering a dark tunnel, losing control of her mind, she lashed out, became angry, and I was the target of most of her anger because I was close at hand. At such a time, I had to learn how to support her in her anger and distress, even though I did not understand it. And I myself became angry and burdened because this was not the way life was supposed to be. We were both losing control over the direction our lives would take, and neither of us realized the extent of the tragedy that was unfolding. Frankly, I was angry because of the serious inconvenience that Nilda's odd behavior was causing me. I was a busy rector of a parish and active in community and diocesan business, not to mention chair of the board of a medical center I had founded. I was losing control over my life as Nilda was losing control over hers. But was I to turn away from my one spouse so I would be available to many? There are times when life presents us with choices. Choices we do not want to have to make, choices we never thought we would have to make. Choices that forces us to decide what our real priorities are. Choices that require us to decide what love means and what love requires. Love does not make its primary home in our emotions, but in the choices we make and in the reasons we make them. As Nilda drifted farther into the dark tunnel of her disease, her anger faded, and now even more deeply ill, she came into a land of her own, a land of illusions, a land where for the most part she lived in the past, asking for her dead parents, wanting me to take her home, home being the house in Muncie, Indiana, where she had lived as a child. The house we were in was the wrong house. I needed to take her to the corner so she could take the bus to go home. When were her parents going to be home? As most of you know, you do not argue with an Alzheimer's patient. Neither do you lie to them. Oddly, though they often cannot remember what you said 5 minutes before, they are often preternaturally efficient at catching you when you lie. But you do not lie. Your parents are not home yet, usually suffices. The owner of the house is letting us stay here as long as we want. Quiet and Nilda's concerns that we were in a house in which we did not belong. Nilda was living in one world and I in another. Which one was the more real? In which one was God more present? When a human being loses touch with reality, whatever reality might mean, when she no longer has short-term memory, when she can no longer care for even her most basic needs, is she fully human? This was the woman I loved, and she was still the woman I loved, but she was no longer the woman I married. And so I had to offer her to God, to place her in God's hands to love and care for as only God could while I tended to her physical needs. And yet I still told her many times how much I loved her. And I tried to teach her, treat her gently with the respect that love demanded. And in her own way, I knew she loved me. There were times I cried. One time was when it was our 25th wedding anniversary, and I asked Nilda if she knew what it was. Of course, I knew she could not remember, and so I told her it was our anniversary, and we had been married 25 years. Her response, delivered so innocently, was, "Are we married?" I felt pressure. I left the room and wept. I am not proud of the way I acted many times during the course of her disease, particularly when I did not understand the reasons for her actions. I became impatient and angry. Even after she was officially diagnosed at Baylor Geriatric Clinic, I was not always as kind or controlled as I would have liked. It was a relief to finally have a diagnosis, but even after that, I am ashamed of the way I acted at times. But Nilda made far more work for me than I would have had to do if she could just have followed some simple instructions. But she could not follow those simple instructions, and if she could follow them, she could not remember them. Her dying involved my dying too. This was the most spiritually powerful aspect of this long and difficult journey that Nilda and I made together. She was dying mentally and physically. I was dying to self in a deep spiritual sense. I was giving up what I wanted for what she needed, and for what I had come to realize that love demanded. I was giving up control of my life in the name of love. I was giving myself to someone who needed my love and my care as she slipped more and more toward death. I was giving up all the plans and dreams I had had of the good times we were going to have once I retired. I was learning patience, greater self-control, and our marriage was growing deeper and more spiritually profound than ever. If, as I noted, life is a school to learn how to love, then Nilda's illness had to contain lessons in love. It forced me to examine my own pride, my own humanity, all that it meant to be human. In preparing this talk, I tried to clarify what spiritual lessons I had received from this experience, and I'll now try to summarize. First, Milda's illness forced me to examine my priorities and to order them appropriately. If obedience to God was my highest priority, then I knew in my head and in my heart that being with Milda was where I had to be, and caring for her was what I had to do. It forced me to recall the vows I had exchanged with my beautiful wife, Milda. I had made promises to her, but not merely to her, but to God. I had a responsibility to care for her, not just out of human compassion and my natural love for her, but out of love for God. And my walking with her through the long period of her decline was a continuous act of love for God. God walked beside us both. In being faithful to Milda, I was, I knew, being faithful to God. Second, I had to learn where God was in Milda's irreversible deterioration. And I repeat again, life is a school to learn to love. We are to learn to love creation, love one another, ourselves, and most of all God. Perhaps I could have placed Milda in a care facility and gone about the business of trying to do great things, whatever those might have been. But many of my great lessons of love were learned taking care of Milda, abandoning my own will to God's will. And God was there patiently teaching me, even as His grace sustained me through difficult times. Third, I regained the gift of tears. In my growing up as a boy and then as a man, I was taught that tears demonstrated weakness and I had to be strong. God cured me of that folly and I learned how to cry. For tears are a gift. They cleanse and they heal. I pity those who will not cry. Tears are a form of reaching out to God, whether with tears of joy or tears of pain. We can relate to God more powerfully through tears than through words. Fourth, this experience impressed on me the uncertainty of life and my inability to control my future. I had to place myself entirely in the hands of God to take me where God would. At the same time, this uncertainty and the difficulties of caring for Milda taught me a greater compassion for others who were suffering. If I were younger and in better health, I would probably train to be a nurse and work free in a community clinic. But I'm neither young nor in good health, and so my ministry must be elsewhere. At least I believe my own experience and the education I gained from it has enabled me to help others who find themselves caregivers for loved ones. Fifth, the experience taught me the importance of spiritual support. Because of my work in the church, I had literally thousands of Christians praying for me and Milda. We were surrounded by a loving community who cared about us and who were there when we needed them. In addition to the spiritual support, there was the physical support provided by friends and professional caregivers. Many were truly in this together with me and Milda. Those who suffer most are those who suffer alone. No one should be alone in time of tragedy. I also learned how to accept help and support from others, to be ministered to rather than simply to minister. Unfortunately, this is a lesson that many Christians, particularly priests, never learn. Sixth, I had to learn patience. As I said, at first I was most impatient and sometimes angry. But I intentionally prayed to heal the both impatience and anger so that I could do even the most menial task, even past some home health aid shied away from, with genuine affection. God, I believe, did heal me of my impatience, so that in the later years of Nilda's illness I could do whatever I had to do, out of love rather than necessity, and in a spirit of love rather than just duty. I still did get angry and impatient, but that was when I saw instances of inhumanity in our medical system, its bias against the elderly, and at times even gross incompetence. But I also encountered truly compassionate doctors, nurses who exemplify the highest traditions of their profession, and professionals who were as concerned about their patients as suffering human beings as they were about modeling the best practices of their lives. Perhaps this is a spiritual issue, perhaps not, but it is nevertheless another question for another time. Seventh, during the time of Nilda's illness, my prayer life deepened. Not in the sense of being able to express my concerns to God or to tell God what I wanted God to do for me, but I developed a deeper relationship with God, a sense of God's presence that transcends words. I did not just believe, but I knew that God was there with me and Nilda. I am, truth be told, a mystic. I define a mystic as someone who experiences ultimate reality, which for me, of course, is God. It is not that a mystic knows what to believe about God or what to say about God, but the mystic knows God, experiences God as real. I am not suggesting that by caring for Nilda I have somehow earned any special rewards from God. What God gives freely. Indeed, my struggles during Nilda's illness taught me, as St. Paul phrased it, how short I fell of the glory of God. But God was present in a powerful, palpable way. At times when I cared for Nilda, and this despite all my flaws, I could find when I engaged in self-examination. The ordeal of caring for a loved one confronts us with many terrible questions. Have I done enough? Have I done too much? Should I call 911 or wait and see what happens? Should I focus on her comfort and quality of life or on her safety? And what if she dies because she chokes on food she enjoys? Or there might be hazards because she has trouble swallowing. How do I try to keep her from doing things that are dangerous, that she insists on doing, while at the same time respecting her dignity and trying as best I can to avoid hurting her physically or emotionally? What is possible? What is impossible? What does God want me to do in a situation where there seem to be no good options? Is now the time that all treatment should cease, and I allow my loved one to die. The time came when Nilda was on hospice and her organs were shutting down, and the hospice nurse asked if I wanted to send Nilda to the hospital. With tears in my eyes, I said I could not do that to Nilda. She died about a week later, and I know I made the right decision. But I also know we live in a death-denying society where medicine considers death a failure, and where families will often subject their loved ones to invasive and painful treatments where there is no hope of a patient's regaining any quality of life, and where the only result is prolonged suffering for both the patient and the caregivers. This is indeed one of the most profound spiritual issues of our day. 3 days after Nilda died, God dumped an entire bucket of heaven on my head and transformed my life. Nilda's memorial service was one of the most beautiful I had ever been a part of. A time of sorrow, but a time of immense joy. There is probably no human disease more devastating than Alzheimer's. So way that I can give in this talk is that even in such devastating circumstances, God can and God does act in powerful ways as God acted in my situation. I also know that there are those who are faced with this terrible disease who rail at God, who do not find any of that peace that passes understanding, or any peace at all, only sorrow and loss. If it were possible, I would gladly give other caregivers the peace that God gave me. But I was reminded by a wise spiritual advisor that peace is not mine to give. But I am convinced that it is critically important that spirituality enter the life of someone caring for a desperately ill loved one. For the plight of the caregiver will be worse than that of the patient. It is a sad fact that the majority of those who are the primary caregivers of a loved one with dementia die before the patient. What can we do to bring a deeper spirituality into the lives of caregivers? I do not have any clear answers. Perhaps the Institute or some of our panel might have suggestions. And what follows now is what happened since I gave that talk. Kenosis, or emptying, is a concept in Christian spirituality. Jesus emptied himself of all the dignity and prerogatives to which he was entitled as God, that he might live a truly human life and die an all-human death, so that we might be able to share in the life of God. Jesus' kenosis was sacrificial. He gave up what he did not have to give up, but his kenosis was done out of love for all humanity, so that, as he said, in being lifted up, he would draw all humanity to himself. In his sacrificial emptying and death, he gave us a lesson in what love might well require of each of us, as we try to open ourselves to the Holy Spirit's transforming power that will draw us ever more into the heart of God. For we too must undergo kenosis, an emptying of ourselves of all that is not God, so that God can fill us. As I noted in my initial presentation, my walking with God in her Alzheimer's was a time of kenosis. I had to shed my hopes, my dreams for the future, the vibrant companionship of the woman I loved so much. What I would have been able to do if time and energy had permitted was gone. All of these things I had to give up for what love required. And as I noted, as space emptied within me, God came to fill it, so that by the time Hilda died, I felt God was walking hand in hand with both of us. I noted, too, that God flooded me with joy and peace just 3 days after Hilda died, but I found that God was hardly finished with me. Kenosis would continue in ways I could not yet imagine. First, I began what seemed like a slow-motion life review. I was made aware of the ways in which I had wounded others, even at times when I felt I had done rather well. I felt shame, and I shed tears of sorrow. And yet there was healing. I was given a vision of those who had wounded me and from whom I felt alienated, although I had forgiven them. And as I saw the faces of these people, I was given overwhelming love toward them. And I knew those wounds were healed. This review, these experiences were not carried out in a spirit of judgment, but in an atmosphere of intense love. I was being healed. And I believe that in my healing, those I had hurt were also being healed. For one thing I have learned is the essential unity of all humanity. We are, as the notion of the body of Christ tells us, truly all in this together. And if one member is sick, then the body is sick. And if one member is healed, then the healing makes the whole body healthier. One might think that my kenosis was incomplete, but it was not so. I have not been in good health since at least 2 years before Milda died. I have survived 2 cancers. I had surgery for colon cancer, surgery that was entirely successful because the cancer had not penetrated the colon walls, so chemotherapy was unnecessary. But this was followed by a post-operative infection that almost killed me, and that resulted in hospitalization more than a month, but left me greatly weakened. I am convinced that the only reason I survived was my intense desire to return to Nilda and take care of her. I was then diagnosed with an aggressive prostate cancer that required 39 sessions of radiation and hormone therapy, which further depleted my body. All the while I was caring for Nilda, who never knew I had had cancer and who would not have remembered it if I had told her. About 2 months ago, I began suffering symptoms that led to additional tests and requests for prayers from members of the church where I am assistant priest. Great concern was expressed about me by the beloved parishioners and by my rector, who thought I should cut back on my activities if I felt too ill to carry them out. I grieved intensely at the thought of having to give up even the work I believed God was still calling me to do. Indeed, I wept at the prospect of having to give up what gave me such joy. But I realized that this activity, too, was something I was clinging to for my own sake, as much, if not more, than for God's sake. And I wrote the following poem to express both my grief and the realization that I had not yet completed the work of kenosis. I call the poem Strictly. As my beloved wife was being stripped of her faculties in her life by Alzheimer's, I too was being stripped of my well-formed plans of folly, of my pride, my life's desire, and when she died, I died. Dead to self, empty. So God could fill that emptiness and make me his alone. Myself stood naked before the Lord, and the Lord said, I want your nakedness. My God, how can I give you my nakedness? I'm stripped of all I once held dear. My nakedness is all I have. God tore away my nakedness, and with it myself. And what remained was only no self, with nothing between it and God. My life now might be called eremitic. I am happy, and I do not feel at all lonely. I have become associated with the Rivendell community, a canonically recognized religious community of the Episcopal Church. I was admitted as a postulant early this year and became a novice on the first profession at their general chapter this summer. And I have taken personal vows of poverty, celibacy, and obedience. I would like to think that now God has truly emptied me of all that does not belong to God. But as I learn, kenosis may never be complete in this life. There are always layers of the onion to be peeled away. Yet without the tragedy of illness, God would never have brought me this far. And as I am being healed, Milda, who is one with me in this life and the next, is an integral part of my healing, as is my first wife, Carol, whom I also lost to death. We can look at Alzheimer's disease and see it only as a terrible tragedy it is, in both the lives of patient and caregiver. But if we look again, we can see God with outstretched arms of love, inviting us to let him embrace us in our pain. And teach us not only how to love, but how to be loved by the love that is God. For God is love, and God is light, even in the dark night of Alzheimer's disease. And God is life, even in the face of death. Thank you.